Hello, everybody. It is wonderful to be back. I am Leslie Wise. I thank you very much for the introduction. I say it's wonderful to be back because I had the privilege of being here in February, working with 4 groups of very committed leaders representing Adelaide, Perth, Brisbane, and Melbourne. And we came together to learn about quality data and pulling together data sets that could be used as the measurement tool in these communities to reduce and end rough sleeping. I have had the great privilege in the States for the last several years of working with about 70 communities on this issue of reducing and ending homelessness. We're working specifically on ending veterans homelessness and chronic homelessness. But one of the things we've quickly learned with the leaders of those communities in the States is that it is impossible to measure progress towards an end state, in this case, functional zero for those subpopulations, if you don't have a data set to measure with. And so we have come fondly to talk about that data set as the by name list. It's really that simple. It's a by name list of all single individuals experiencing homelessness that we collect, the community leaders collect, with some very basic information about the needs and histories of those people, so that we can use that data and really respond with our best strategies, our smartest thinking. And so with those community leaders from Adelaide, Perth, Brisbane, and Melbourne, we are well on our way of building by name lists in those communities to be that, the data source for reducing and ending rough sleeping in those communities. I am here now, what month is this? August, again, to continue that work with those 4 communities and to not just confirm quality data sets, but to talk about what the methods and tools are for using those data sets to now really set smart strategies to reduce the number of people experiencing homelessness, in this case, rough sleepers, towards functional zero, towards that end state that we all share. So I just want to provide a bit more information about what a by name list is. With that data source, the by name list can help local communities working towards a shared end state really approach the issue by triaging the resources in a much smarter way. Let's be honest, we have a very finite number of resources we can use to address this issue. With this data, we can make smarter decisions on how those housing resources should be used, how those really, really finite and valuable interventions that we have should be targeted. With by name lists, we can improve our systemic responses. We have data now that can talk about the history every month of people coming into the system and people exiting the systems in ways that we never could before the by name list. So we can really pick smart strategies and test those strategies to measure their impact on the active number of people experiencing homelessness every month. And we can be smarter advocates. We can demand the resources that we think are necessary for reducing and ending homelessness based on real, concrete data, right? So who's in the room? Adelaide, Perth, Brisbane, Melbourne. Raise your hand if you are committed to confirming quality by name lists. Thank you, Dr. Stafford. I see some of my friends in the room. You are gonna join, you're gonna join me and my colleagues Jake and Melanie tomorrow, and we're gonna continue the journey together. We're gonna be joined by an awesome team representing the efforts in Sydney, and we're gonna work on the methods and resources and tools associated with reducing the number of people experiencing rough sleeping. So we're gonna do that together, starting tomorrow, going into Friday. Thanks so much. Jake, come on up and talk about inflow and what we're learning from the States relative to inflow.
Hey folks, Leslie said what month is it? I'll add what time is it, because we're totally jet lagged and have no idea where we are or what's going on. It's really good to be back. I was here, I think it was last year, 2 years ago for this very same conference to speak to you all, maybe even in this room. So it's nice to see a lot of faces that I spent time with last time. We've had some great meetings here this time as well. I will just add, I was reflecting on the moment I was here last time and realizing it was just after Charlottesville and the white supremacist rallies and our president's failure to condemn and speak honestly about those things. And I just felt the need to sort of mention that last time that I was here. And I was just kind of remembering that this morning and then incredibly disheartened to realize here I am back again in the wake of yet another racially motivated incident of violence that is rocking our country right now. And I think just the irony of suggesting that we have come across an ocean with something to teach anyone in this room when gun violence, which is a problem we are struggling with right now, is a problem that you all took decisive action on and made a difference on a long time ago. So just want to ask for your support and your positive thoughts for the folks in our country. It's a tough time right now. Yeah. I will just briefly, a lot of you have seen these data points. It's kind of a setup to my talk, and then I'll move into my talk. But this is just basically what you're looking at is a picture. If we were going to say, what are the dynamics of homelessness? How does this problem move and change over time, right? One of the crazy things we've all done for a long time is assumed homelessness was a static problem. We've counted it maybe once a year or whatever, or put people in our system and then never followed up to ask, is that person even still experiencing homelessness? We know this is actually a dynamic problem, and this is just a way of looking at what that dynamism looks like. Every month, you've got people coming in to your system, right? We call that inflow. That's what I'm going to talk about today. You've got people experiencing homelessness right now, and you've got people moving out of your system, hopefully because you've connected them to some kind of housing placement, or they've done that themselves and you can verify that. But sometimes, for other reasons, people move on. They self-resolve, they move away, they pass away, right? There are lots of different things that happen. But I just think it's important to set this up, that we have got to start treating this problem as a dynamic problem and understanding it over time, in real time, if we want to make an impact on the issue. And I'll explain a little bit more about what I mean in a second. How many people were in the room this morning for the talk about the kinds of structural changes that are needed if we really want to end homelessness over time? I heard there was a standing ovation. Yeah, I was not here yet. I will make a humble entry into the discussion and say that I am an advocate, a passionate one, of structural reform in your country and mine. And the purpose of this talk, I've affectionately titled, While We're Waiting. Concrete thoughts on reducing inflow into homelessness by next month or even sooner, because real people are counting on us right now, and the revolution is taking a very long time. So what can we do now? That's what I'm going to try to talk about. But I don't want you to hear that as an either or. I think sometimes it's cast as you can get technical and try to do things now, or you can see the need for structural change. And I think the reality is for homeless people and for our communities, we have to do both. So, okay. The first thing I want to talk about is, this is just based on what we're seeing in the US. How many people have heard of the Built for Zero movement in the United States? Yeah, the Adelaide Zero Project has drawn some inspiration from that, and also we are in the process of trying to rip some things off from them as well. So I co-direct the Built for Zero team in the US, and that's about 80 communities now across the US, and another 40 that have launched as Built for Zero Canada. So we have a lot of data, a lot of information on what's going on in these communities. And when it comes to a question like inflow, what can we do to reduce the number of people coming into homelessness right now? That data is proving very useful as we start to think about that question. The first thing I want to suggest is that inflow is too big a category, right? The idea of inflow into homelessness, the idea of what's going on when we're seeing more people come into our systems, we've got to be more nuanced about it than that. Prevention is the same way. Prevention is too big a word, right? This is a problem that is more nuanced than we often give it credit for. So I want to just show you a couple examples from the data of how something that looks like a very similar problem across a few different communities can actually be a very different problem when we dig into the data and use that as a way to understand what's going on. This is real data, live data from Oklahoma City. Everyone familiar, or at least know that Oklahoma City is a place in the world? There's not a whole lot going on there, I won't lie. But there are some really dedicated people there working on ending homelessness. In Oklahoma City, this is their real data on veterans, military veterans experiencing homelessness, one of the great shames of the United States that we have at one time had 100,000 of our veterans on the streets. As you can see, Oklahoma City has driven a reduction in veteran homelessness. You can see actually a fairly considerable one. But there's this moment that looks like, what is that, maybe June of 2018, where after 4 consistent months of reduction, we suddenly see the first uptick in a while, yeah? And you might ask the question, if you're that team, and now you have monthly data, okay, what's going on there? Because what we don't want is to wait a whole nother year before we realize that's a problem and then start lobbying for a solution, and it might be 5 years or 10 years or 20 years before we can do anything about that. So if we want to do something now, we've got to call a meeting and say, what do we know about this system and what might be going on that's explaining what we're seeing? And here's what they saw in Oklahoma City. This is true every time homelessness rises. It basically means one thing: your inflow is greater than your outflow, right? You've got more people coming in than you're getting out. That's what's happening when homelessness is going up anywhere, yeah? Every time you see that little gray square on the bottom of this graph light up red, that's what that means. It's a signal to our communities. You're going backwards. You better have a meeting and talk about it. And in Oklahoma City, they looked at that. They said, okay, but why? Why is inflow going up? And they were able to break that down into some categories, and you see those categories in front of you. What they found, that purple bar on the bottom, is that about 60% of the people they were seeing were becoming homeless for the very first time. In other words, these are people we've never seen before. We've got pretty good data quality, we think, in Oklahoma City. We've never seen these folks before, so we think this is their first experience of homelessness. But they also saw another thing, which is that second bar you're looking at. It's about 40% there. Now, what is that bar? It's a very technical, sort of boring term, which is returned from inactive. Returned from inactive. Do people know, anyone have a sense of what that means? Sort of a weird idea. It's basically our fancy data speak way of saying, these are actually people we've seen before and we lost track of. We don't know what happened to them. And now they're back on our radar again, yeah? And I'll just say, this is a very high number of people to be returning from inactive. If your community has good data quality, the number of people returning from your inactive list should be relatively small, because you should be doing a better job at holding on to people and engaging with people as regularly as possible to make sure that you're not losing them in your system, right? They're not falling through the cracks. If they've escaped homelessness, great, but we need to know that and be able to confirm that. And if they haven't, we need to know where they are in the housing process and make sure it's still somebody's job to move them through, right? So 40% of people returning from inactive, what that says to me about Oklahoma City is, wait a minute, your inflow may or may not be as high as you think it is. The real problem here is we don't know, because your data quality is not good. You're not keeping track of people over time, and people are getting lost in the bureaucracy. So if I were going to say to Oklahoma City, let's do something right now to try to reduce your inflow, the first thing I would say is, you've got to get a better picture of what's going on if you ever hope to solve this problem. So let's work on data quality. Now, here's another community with a very similar pattern. This is Chattanooga. People know Chattanooga, about 2 hours south of Nashville, Tennessee. It's a smaller city, really pretty city, actually, close to me in Atlanta. And Chattanooga's been driving a pretty steady reduction in veteran homelessness as well. This is really, really exciting. And then you see something really similar happen around, that looks like maybe August of 2018, after, looks like 5 or 6 months of consistent reduction. So things are going well. And then all of a sudden, we start to see an uptick again. Now, that uptick, that might just be variation in our system. It might just be kind of the way things go. It could be normal. But what we want to do is make sure we really understand. So in Chattanooga, they do the same thing. And they find the same thing as Oklahoma City, which is our inflow is dramatically exceeding our outflow in that month. More people are coming into homelessness than we're getting out. So you might say, inflow, the problem is inflow. In Oklahoma City and Chattanooga, it's the same. So the only things we can do about inflow, right, is structural reform to prevent so many people from coming into homelessness. But when you dig in Chattanooga, by the way, we should do that, right? The question is there something Chattanooga could do right now? When they dig into their data, they see that actually over a quarter of the people coming into homelessness that month in Chattanooga are people that they've not only seen before, they've already housed. They've moved into a positive housing placement with services and a permanent tenancy and support to pay the rent, right? And those people have come back into homelessness. Some of this in a system is normal, and you all know this because we all do this work, right? We see people come back into homelessness after we house them. That happens. 26% of your inflow coming back into housing is more than double the national average in our database. This is not what good service delivery looks like. So if we're coaching Chattanooga and they say we've got to do something about our inflow, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull up this data and I'm going to say, let's call together all the folks in your community that provide services to people after they are housed, and let's ask them what's going on. Do they have the support they need? Can we do some retraining about good service delivery? Make sure people are being faithful to the evidence-based practices we know work to keep people in housing, right? This is a different problem than what we see in Oklahoma City, even if it looks the same at the beginning. The last community I'm going to show you, and then I'm going to move into the last part of my talk, is Jacksonville. You guys are getting a lot of data here. This is Jacksonville. They're seeing a really similar pattern, as I mentioned. This is a really exciting community. It's actually our bet to become the first large city in the US to end veteran homelessness. Jacksonville, if you don't know it, is a city in Florida. It's about 5 hours south of me in Atlanta. And actually, although Atlanta's probably the city you know better, Jacksonville is the biggest city in the southern United States. It's the largest city in the region. So this is a very large place, and they impressively have been driving consistent reductions in veteran homelessness for a long time now. And then something happens. Looks like it starts, I'm gonna say around October of 2018. After a long time of relatively consistent downturn, Jacksonville sees an uptick. So what are they gonna do? Dig into the data and ask why, right? Well, like the other cities, an uptick means inflow is dramatically exceeding outflow. But in Jacksonville, we see the problem we maybe came here expecting to see, which is that 98% of the people becoming homeless in that community that month are homeless for the very first time. This is a community with excellent data quality, arguably some of the best data quality of any community that we support. If there are people becoming homeless, they usually catch them. And 98% of those people that month are people they've never seen before. So there is something going on in this community that is driving people into homelessness who have not been vulnerable to that experience before, right? So if you're Jacksonville, potentially you've got a tougher challenge than these other two cities, right? We've got to move upstream in a different way. And now we know that we need to do that. What are some things we could try? So that's the first point I want to make, is that inflow is too broad a category, and we need better data, like what you've been building here in Adelaide over the last 2 years, to make sure that we are crystal clear on what problem we are trying to solve at any given time. If the goal is reductions, fewer people experiencing homelessness this month than last month, and even fewer next month, we've got to know what problem we're trying to solve that is standing in the way of that outcome. Here's the next point I want to make. We've got to develop strategies in the realm of the levers we can control, right? We've got to develop strategies in the realm of the levers we can control. There are a lot of different leverage points for improvement in a system. We've talked about one today, and it's the one people usually go to first. That's the realm of structural leverage points, right? We tend to go to structural leverage points first because they have the potential to make the biggest impact over time for the most people, right? They also have the advantage of not having to be as precise as some of the other ways we might intervene, because sweeping structural change often produces large effects. But if I asked you, how many people in this room today, when you go back to your job after this conference, control immediately, right in front of you, a lever of structural change? Now, we are advocates. We need to be. We are voters, I hope. We need to be. But how many of you today directly are in a position? There might be some counselors here, maybe the minister. My guess is not too many other hands are going to go up, right? So the question becomes, can we just wait and count on those folks? And I hope that we can. But also, what can I do? So we need a way of understanding what space we're operating in if we want to get clear on the levers we might be able to pull. Well, luckily, there are some other spaces. One is the technical space. My guess is a lot of us are operating in the technical space. The technical space is the space of practical service delivery. How many people in this room work with clients? Hands on. Yeah, raise your hand. Let me see. Yeah, okay, great. A lot of you are operating in the technical space, right? You have the ability to do service delivery one way or another way. If you don't like the way it's working, you can try to do something differently. These are housing and service models. It's the realm of evidence-based practices and interventions, right? The technical space is a huge space for innovation. And then there's another space, and I think people tend to forget about this space, and it's the space that my career mostly focuses on, and Leslie and Melanie, who are here with me, this is the space we mostly play in. I've named it the implementation space. You could call it other things, maybe the systemic space. It's different from the structural space. It's about how structural decisions get translated into technical action, right? So the decisions that are made at the structural level, how money gets allocated, laws and policies. How does that actually get implemented so that it comes out as a technical action in all of the programs that you all run? This question has to do with different things, like how different systems and agencies do or don't collaborate, right? Another way you might say this, how do the pieces fit together around the user? Most people experiencing homelessness are not just dealing with one system, but most of us are only working in one system, right? So do the pieces fit together? This is a space of implementation innovation. Can we change the way we're implementing decisions that have been made at the structural level? And there is a lot of power there. A lot of power. We have not had much structural change in the United States in the last 10 years, intentional structural change. We have 11 communities that have gotten all the way to zero on homelessness in that time, largely by exploring the implementation space. So there is a lot of leverage there. I don't want us to discount that. I've probably got just a few minutes left. I want to give you some concrete examples because you're saying this is great theory. Thanks for the, political science lesson or whatever. But what would it look like to actually do something in each of these spaces? Because these are the spaces we occupy. I'm going to start with the technical space. I had the privilege, and I'll call it a privilege lightly because it was actually very difficult, to spend 3 days in a place called Roanoke, Virginia. Roanoke is actually a lot like Adelaide. It's a smaller city nestled in beautiful hills of Eastern Virginia. This is a gorgeous place to be. I was there for 3 days trying to understand inflow in that community. This was about 3 weeks ago. And the way that I did that was I asked local service providers, our team asked local service providers if they could pull 20 people from their by name list, so 20 people that are experiencing long-term homelessness right now, and could we talk to each one of them for at least an hour? We paid folks $50 for their time, we recorded those conversations, and the entire structure of the conversation was designed to understand people's pathways into homelessness. And it was heavy. It was really, really heavy, yeah. I don't spend a lot of time in that space in my job. It was really, really tough. Some of you spend more time in that space, so I think you know. But I was shocked because there's a question that we asked at the end of that interview, and the question was, in the first month that you experienced homelessness, is there anything that you or anyone else could have done? So these are people that are experiencing long-term homelessness. They've been homeless a year at a minimum, most of them 5 or 6 years or more. In the first month, is there something that you or anyone could have done that would have resolved your housing crisis? I will tell you that I spoke to 12 people that week. That was my sort of caseload for the week. There were only 2 of them that for a flexible amount of less than $500 could not have resolved their own homelessness in the first month. And here they are 5, 6, 10 years later, still homeless, still stuck in a system that is not designed to house them, right? Some of the technical ideas that the people experiencing homelessness proposed to me. One woman said, I'm a victim of domestic violence, I'm a survivor. In the first month, I didn't have my ID because I had to flee my home where my husband still lived, and I left all my documents and all my possessions there. And what I wanted was $400 to rent a U-Haul truck and bring the strongest man that I knew to go and just get my things back. And nobody could give me a grant because no government program was permitted to spend money on something so flexible or random as renting a trailer. And if I'd been able to do that, I wouldn't be where I am now, several years later, still not able to enroll in any public benefits because no one has been able to figure out how to confirm my identity, who I am. Give me a break, right? This is a space for technical innovation to stem inflow. I heard this story so many times. Another guy said, for $250, I could have got my truck out of impound. I would have driven home to my family. He'd been homeless 7 years when he told me that. 7 years. Here's another case study. This is in the implementation space. This is Rockford, Illinois. Here's what you're looking at. I just want to explain. The purple bars are inflow. The blue bars are outflow. Yeah. So purple bars, people coming in. Blue bars, people going out. You can see Rockford is experiencing, over this time, a fairly steady increase in inflow, right? All of a sudden, the problem goes from being relatively manageable to being relatively large. And on the back end there, we have 2 months where inflow pretty dramatically exceeds outflow. This is among homeless families. That's the population this community is focused on at this time. So Rockford says, we got to get this number down, and there's no new money coming. At least not right now, not anytime soon. What are we going to do? How are we going to take responsibility for this problem, even as we wait on others to act? Here's what they came up with. They said, let's try a test of change, a small test of change. Those of you working with us in the action labs are going to get really familiar with this language, a small test of change. Basically means, is there something we could try on a really small scale to see if it works? And then maybe we could scale it up if it does, or make the case for someone else to help us do that. They said, we've noticed from digging into our data that a lot of this inflow is coming from evictions. I actually don't know what your eviction policy looks like here. In the United States, eviction policy is sort of a funny word because we don't really have one. It's basically a business. Landlords are free to evict people. In many, many places, there is not a whole lot of protection for this. So you have families falling behind on their rent, and they get evicted. And this is driving families into inflow. The test of change that Rockford decided they would attempt was to target individuals who had received 5-day eviction notices. Basically means you have 5 days to get out, or we're coming for you to padlock your door and take your stuff. And that's basically what happens. So when that happens, families call a number, most of them, looking for help. And largely, even though there are some resources to try to deal with this, nothing happens in response. Rockford said, we, the people responsible for dealing with homelessness after it actually happens, are going to say, what if we made ourselves responsible for dealing with homelessness before it happens? We're going to go connect to those families. We're going to ask them what they need. And what they found was most of them weren't actually behind on their rent by very much. And so Rockford launched a pilot to try to mediate these cases, try to negotiate with landlords. And in many, many cases, they were able to do this. They were basically able to say to a landlord, what would it take? Just tell us, what would it take for you to agree not to evict this person? And a lot of times, it was a small portion of the arrears being cleared, or the family agreeing to go on a repayment plan, or something else that is much cheaper than the cost of sheltering a family for a year or more, and then looking for a subsidized housing unit to put them in, yeah? So Rockford said, okay, we're gonna do this. This is the Department of Human Services. They said, we agree, that's a better use of funds. Let's free up some money for this landlord mediation. And here's what they were able to do. Drive a significant reduction in both evictions and broader inflow into family homelessness over the next several months. Rockford is now on track to become the first community in the United States to end family homelessness, and we believe within a year after that, they will be the first community in the United States to end all homelessness. All homelessness. They are on track to do that. I'm going to skip these last slides. This is my attempt at summing up the journey of the homeless response system over time. The one I want you to focus on is where I think we are now, the 4th generation. This is what we're trying to build, where we actually have accountable community systems that have people in all 3 spaces, the structural space, the implementation space, and the technical space at the table, so that as you use that data to get really clear on the problem you're trying to solve, and then you go around the table and say, which lever would we have to pull to fix that thing? You've got someone in the room convinced by that data, ready to take action in the space that they control. It takes all 3 spaces to do this work well. It takes all 3 spaces to end homelessness. I am going to wrap up, but I really appreciate the chance to talk to you. We have not solved for inflow. There are just some communities doing some really innovative things, and I am excited to see what you try here as well, because you're in a similar position. The structural change that you want is going to take a long time, potentially, and we've got to figure out how to do something today. So I hope this has opened a little bit of insight into some of the kinds of things we might try, and I'd love to talk to you more after. Thanks very much.